Hi, welcome back to Scrapism. Today I'm going to show you a really important technique for how to scrape websites that were not scrapable using the previous technique I showed, that previous technique being requests and Beautiful Soup. So you may have noticed if you're trying to run some of these examples at home or scraping websites that I haven't demoed, that using requests and Beautiful Soup will frequently fail. And there's two reasons that they might fail. One reason is that the website you're trying to scrape has detected that you're some kind of bot and is preventing you from doing it, right? They're blocking you. And the other reason is that many websites these days being 2020, they don't load all of their content initially with the HTML that gets sent to the browser. So when you go to a website, some initial HTML gets loaded, and then afterwards, more content gets loaded in using JavaScript. So when you use requests to download HTML from a site, you're actually just getting that initial bit of content and not necessarily the full content that's visible to you on the page when you visit it in a regular browser. So the solution to this is to actually use an actual real browser to do your web scraping and to write some program that automates control over that browser. There's a few tools that help you do this. One of them is called Selenium, and another is called Puppeteer. Today we're going to talk about Selenium, and then I'm going to make another video that talks about Puppeteer. So before I talk about Selenium, though, I just want to briefly show you the website that we're going to be scraping today, and that website is Alibaba.com, which is one of my favorite websites to scrape. Alibaba, it has like every conceivable commodity that's made, and you buy them directly from the manufacturer, and there's some really interesting and weird and alarming things for sale on the website. For example, riot gear. So what we want to do today, the example that we're going to be working towards, is scraping Alibaba for riot gear products. And to show you that this doesn't quite work if you try to do it using requests and Beautiful Soup, let's just first do that. So I'm just going to type into Alibaba, I'll type in riot gear, I'll hit enter. And you can see that we've got a bunch of items appear, tons of riot gear for sale here. And maybe you noticed that when I scrolled down, more products kind of got loaded in. Let's go to the second page so you can see it again. So if I go and I kind of scroll down a little bit slowly, kind of go down a little bit, at some point, oh, there it happened. I hit the bottom and more got loaded in. So again, what's happening here is there's some initial things coming into the browser and then more stuff happens later on. So if we were to try to scrape this site using requests and Beautiful Soup, not everything would work. Let's just give it a shot really quickly and see what happens. I'll go over to terminal. I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to make a new directory called Alibaba, and we'll just cd into Alibaba. Now I'm going to go over to Visual Studio Code. I'll make a new file. I'll save it on the desktop in Alibaba, and I'll call this one Baba requests.py. Now, just like doing the same thing we did for the last few videos, I'll import requests, and from BS4, I will import Beautiful Soup. And then I'll do r equals requests.get, and then in quotes, copy that, paste the URL in. And finally, let's figure out a CSS selector we're interested in. I'll just, for the moment, just get the titles. So I'll click inspect, and I can see that's in a p tag, and it's in, let's do H4s. I think that makes the most sense. This is in an H4 here. So I'll go back over here. I'll say items. No, I'll say soup equals Beautiful Soup r.text. And then I'll write items equals soup.select, and then in quotes, h4, that's our selector. And finally, for I in items, print I.text. So this should be really familiar if you've seen the previous videos in the series. But you'll notice when I run this from the terminal, Python baba request.py, and I hit enter. Sorry, I should have written Python 3 baba requests. Okay, great. So first of all, we're getting an error, but let's ignore that for the moment. Let's see, we're actually not getting, here are the results. So it's something, we're getting something, right? But if I look here, I'm getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total results. And when I look back over on the page, and I'll just close this for a second, I'm getting, there's far more than 8 things on the website. So we know that something isn't working quite according to plan. Now, there's a pretty quick way to sort of figure out what's getting loaded in with JavaScript and what's not getting loaded in with JavaScript, like what's getting loaded in with that initial HTML. And the way to do that is you can install a little extension in your browser that temporarily disables JavaScript. So I have one here called, what's this one? Quick JavaScript Switcher. And if I click Quick JavaScript Switcher, it reloads the page and it shows me that far fewer things got loaded in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That makes sense. Only 8 things got loaded in. This is really helpful when you're trying to do some web scraping. You maybe are starting with requests in Beautiful Soup. Things aren't working. It's a really good idea just to open up the browser and turn JavaScript off and see what's going on without the JavaScript. You'll notice most websites actually don't work with JavaScript off. So for example, if I go to maps.google.com and I turn off JavaScript, it won't even load the page. It just says, when you have eliminated the JavaScript, whatever remains must be an empty page. So, you know, obviously Google Maps could provide a version of itself that had JavaScript disabled in some way, but they've chosen not to. So Selenium really helps us get around these issues. To install Selenium, you're going to want to use pip3 install Selenium. And I already have it installed, so nothing will happen. And then the second thing that you need to do is you need to install what's called a WebDriver. So Selenium is a library that acts as a bridge between, it allows you to control your web browsers, but it requires another program that kind of acts as a bridge between Selenium and the actual browser, and that's called the driver. So there's different ones for different browsers. We're going to be automating Chrome today, and the driver that we need to install is called Chrome driver. So on a Mac, I can install this with brew cask, not brew cask install Chrome driver. So now we have Selenium installed, we have the Chrome driver installed. Let's make our Python script that, at least in the beginning, maybe just visits Alibaba. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to make a new file, and I'll save this one as just baba.py. So to use Selenium, the first thing you have to do is import it. I'll say from Selenium import WebDriver. And then the next thing you have to do is create a driver object that tells Selenium which browser you want to control. So in our case, what we're going to do is say driver equals WebDriver dot and then capital C Chrome. Third thing is you have to go to a website, and to do that, you use the get method. Driver dot get, and then in parentheses a URL. And so let's just go ahead and use this same URL here that we used before, which is just searching for riot gear. And then finally, let's not even do anything yet. Let's just do driver.close, and you'll see what happens. So I'm going to go over, I'm going to run this in the terminal, Python 3, baba.py, and hit enter. And immediately we'll have an error. This is a Mac-specific error, But what's going on is Chrome driver is a program, and when we run Selenium and try to open up with Chrome with it, Selenium actually is opening up this Chrome driver program. But Chrome driver cannot be opened because the developer cannot be verified. Okay, do not move it to trash. Instead, hit cancel here. And then what you can do is open up your system preferences. And we can actually allow our system to run Chrome driver by going to Security and Privacy. Click on the General tab, and you'll see down here it says Chrome driver was blocked. So if I just click Allow Anyway, great. Now I can close this, go back over here, and let's run that code again. And now, again, it's saying it can't be verified, but it allows us the option of opening it. So I'm going to click Open. And now what we should see is that Chrome opens up, it goes to the web page we requested, and then it immediately closes. So now let's run that same example that I did before, and let's just get the titles to begin with. We'll do something a little bit more complicated as this example develops, but to begin, let's get those H4 elements. So the syntax in Selenium for doing this is a bit more cumbersome than in Beautiful Soup. We'll say items equals driver dot find elements by CSS selector, and then in quotes the selector that you want. So it's a very long function name. And notice also it's find elements by CSS selector. It has to be plural if you want to look for multiple elements. So next up, let's go for I in items, and let's just print I.text. I'll save that. I'll go ahead over here and let's run it again. And now back over here, we see that many more items have actually loaded in. It's still not perhaps as many as we were expecting, but significantly more than before. So the next step that I'd like to do is I want to load the rest of those items that the page loads when you scroll down, right? So how can I do that using Selenium? And the trick is a little bit weird, but because we're opening up a real browser, we can actually execute JavaScript in that real browser, and that JavaScript can do anything that we want it to do. And one thing that we can do is we can actually tell the page to scroll down. So let's just look at that before we do it in Selenium. Let's look at it in Chrome itself. So if I'm in Chrome here and I open up the JavaScript console by typing Command Option C, and I just scroll up a little bit, here is our JavaScript console down here. I can type any bit of JavaScript I want to in here. So for example, I could write, alert hello or something, right? And what we get is some alert pops up. Now there is a JavaScript function for scrolling to some position on the screen, and that function is window.scroll to, and then I can put in an x and a y value. So I can say scroll to 0x, don't try going on the x-axis, but scroll some position down on the y-axis. So 0, if I put in 0.20, for example, and hit enter, we should see that our page scrolled down 20 pixels. But what I want to do is I want to scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, because I know that when I do that, that JavaScript loading of extra content will actually kick in. And the way that we can do that is we can get the height of the page, right? We want to scroll all the way to the bottom, which is all the way the height of the page, by writing document.body.scroll height. And that gives us a number, 6,193. That's the total height of the document. So if I write window.scroll to 0, document.body.scroll height, and hit enter, we will go all the way down to the bottom of the screen. And the other thing that's going to happen is it's going to load in. Oh, sorry, I've disabled JavaScript in this browser, so it's not working. If I re-enable it, let's just do this one more time. Let's just reload the page. My bad. And I'm going to run this. I'm going to run this one more time. So deep breath. Okay. So if I run, here we go. Wow, there's a lot of stuff going on in this JavaScript console. If I run window.scroll to 0, document.body.scroll height, hit enter, it'll scroll down to the bottom of the page. And what we'll see is that more content also got loaded in automatically. So we can tell Selenium to run this JavaScript code after the page loads. And the way that we do that is with a Selenium function called execute, rather called execute script. So before we use our find elements by CSS Selector, and after we get the page right in the middle here, I'm going to write driver.execute script, and then in parentheses and in quotes, any JavaScript that I want to run. In this case, it's window.scroll to 0, document.body.scroll height. Okay, let's make this a little better so you can see it. Driver.execute script, window.scroll to 0, document.body.scroll height. Great. I'll hit save. And the other thing that we're going to do, just because I already know this is going to be a problem, is that there might be a little bit of an issue with the timing. So if we scroll all the way to the bottom and then we immediately try to get all of those elements by their CSS selector, some of them might not have loaded in yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of delay in here. I'm going to import the time function, or the time module, and then after we get the page, I'm just going to sleep, time.sleep for 1 second. And then after we scroll to the bottom, I'm going to sleep again. And I'm just guessing what the right amount of time is. We'll say 2 seconds. So we'll do a time.sleep after we get the page, and then we'll scroll to the bottom, we'll sleep for 2 seconds, then we'll get those items, print them out, and then we'll close it. Okay. I will hit save. And let's run this one more time. Okay, so now it's loaded the page, scroll to the bottom, the rest of the stuff loaded in, and I can see over here now we've got way more products. So next up, let's not just get the titles, but let's get the prices of the products, maybe the URL of the product, and the URL of that main image. To get all of that information, instead of grabbing just those H4 tags, I think we're going to have to change what our CSS selector is. I'm going to go back into Chrome. I'll just close this for a second. And we can see that if we want to get, the title, the price, the image URL, what I'm going to want to do is first grab the whole kind of product div, the whole element that the product is located in. And I think, let me just rearrange things really quickly here, if I can. There we go. So what I want to do is grab maybe this. Let's see what that is. So each of these products is inside of a div called list no v1 offer outer. It's also in another one called j offer wrapper. And I think we could pick either of these. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to go with j offer wrapper. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'll delete this and put .j offer wrapper. Great. So now we've got these items, which now represent those full divs. And then the next thing we have to do is we have to run another CSS query on each of these items. So for items, we can say product name equals, and now we'll say select not on the driver, but on the each individual item, i.find element, not elements, element by CSS Selector. And now we can say h4. So get the h4s that are inside each of these elements. And then we can also say price equals, and this should be text. We can also say price equals, and then let's find what this price is. Inspect. This looks like it's in a paragraph whose class is gallery offer price. Great. gallery offer price. So I'll select that, I'll copy it, and we'll do the same thing. I.find element by CSS Selector gallery offer price. And this should also be .text. Text will grab out the text element. So now let's just print this and see if it works. We'll say print price, comma, product name. And let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. And I'll clear my screen first. Okay, we're loading the page. We're waiting a few seconds. We drop to the bottom, and I can see stuff getting printed off here. Okay, great. So now we have the price, and we also have the titles. So that's better. And maybe we should also get the URL or the image URL. I'm already going to tell you, though, one thing that's going to be tricky for us is, and this is just because I happen to know that how Alibaba works a little bit, is that not all of these items are necessarily going to have prices associated with them. For example, this Centurion thigh and groin protection, black anti-riot gear groin protector, has a minimum order of 500 pieces, but no price associated with it. So what's going to happen in our script when it comes across this, when it's looking for an element that doesn't exist? Let's go ahead, and I'm going to change our URL to this one just so we can see what happens. So I'm going to go up here, I will delete this URL, and I will put in this other one. It's just page equals 2 is the difference. And I'm going to run it again so we can see the error as it appears. So far so good. We load the page, we scroll down, and then something bad. Okay, let's see what happened. I'm going to move this over here. Something bad happened. Message, no such element, unable to locate element, gallery offer price. That makes sense. We ran into something, it couldn't find it, it gave us an error, and the whole script just quit. Notice though that this is annoying. Notice though that when we get an error here, the driver didn't actually quit the Chrome, so I'm just going to quit Chrome for us. Okay. So we can fix this, and the easiest way to fix this is actually to wrap each of these CSS Selector methods in try except blocks. And what this means is that you can tell Python, try to do this thing. If you have an error, do this other thing. And it looks like this. We can say try : and then I'll put this indented here, product name equals that, and then we write except : and this says, so this tries to do what's inside of this block. If it fails, do what's inside of this except block. And for now, we'll just say product name equals none. And we'll do the same with price. Try : except : price equals none. And now at least it's going to be, our data is going to be a little bit weird, but at least what's going to happen is if there's a problem with finding one of these CSS selectors, the whole script isn't going to just like crap out and die. It'll still work. So if I run this again, we should see now, hopefully things are working. As it runs that, I just want to say, let's do the next thing. The next thing I want to do is I want to get these images, okay? So I'm going to go over to Chrome again, and I'm going to try to figure out how are these images getting loaded in. Well, if I right-click and I do inspect again, I can see that these are loaded in. These are loaded in as images, right? And they have a source. The source is a little bit weird because it starts with 2 slashes rather than HTTP or HTTPS. Something starting with 2 slashes, the browser interprets that as either use HTTP or use HTTPS, depending on if the website was loaded with HTTP or HTTPS. So we can deal with that. The other thing that you may have noticed if you're going through Alibaba is that some of these images, you can barely see it, but when I scroll down, the images are not actually loaded already. They get loaded in as as those elements become visible on the screen. So if we try to use the source of the image, it might not always work. We can see what happens. Let's take another look at this. We have this image source equals, and then what I notice, and this is interesting, what I notice is that this image is inside of a div that has a special attribute called data image. And what I'm guessing, what I'm speculating, I mean, I'm not guessing, I know this is how it's working, but the first time, what you might speculate is that the image the actual image tag does not have a source attribute associated with it until it becomes visible on the screen, and then it uses its parent's div data image attribute to load the image source. So one thing that we can do is instead of even bothering to get the image source, we can just grab this data image attribute from this div here, this div that's called SEB image switcher __ images. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab this right here. I'm going to copy it. We'll go back to Visual Studio Code and we'll say try again. Image URL equals i.find element by CSS Selector, and then in quotes dot this guy. And now instead of getting text, what we want is to get that attribute image data, or was it data image? Image data or data image, sorry. So let's actually break this up into two commands. I'll say image div, okay, that's the div, equals this guy over here. And then we'll say image URL equals image div. And to get an attribute in Selenium, we use the .get _ attribute method, data -image. And finally, because I know, well, we'll see what happens. We'll do print price, product name, and let's also print image URL. Now, what we'll see right away when I run this is I forgot to do something. I needed an except line, so I'll say except image URL equals none. And I will run this again. And what we'll see back over here when this eventually happens is that there's an issue with our image URLs, which is just, it's not the end of the world, but you'll notice they start with these 2 / rather than HTTP or HTTPS. So not ideal, so let's just fix that. We'll say here, image URL equals HTTPS : plus image URL. So this will prepend HTTPS to our image URL, and then it'll make a better URL for us. So there are really 2 more things that I want to do with this example before we complete it. One is that so far I've just been, like in all of the examples in this series, we've just been printing stuff to the terminal, and that's actually like it can be a really good way of collecting data, but it's also frequently not a good way. So I'd like to save all of the data from this scrape into some kind of useful file, and I think a JSON file is what I'd like to do. The other thing I'd like to do is I want to download all of these extremely strange images for us. So let's do this one step at a time. The first thing that we can do, let's go ahead and download those images. So there's a few different ways of downloading images in Python, or downloading any file in Python. Like everything, there's not necessarily a right answer, but I find that one very, very easy way to do this is to use another third-party library called wget. So I'm going to go over here, back to my terminal, and I'm going to install the wget library. pip3 install wget. And I already have it, so nothing happened. Then at the top of our code, I'm going to import it. Import wget. And then finally, down here in our try method, we'll also download the images. I think that we should probably make a folder to save all these images in, otherwise things might get messy. So I'm going to make, first of all, a new folder called images in the same folder as Alibaba. So I just did mkdir images. And wget is really, really simple. It takes two parameters, the URL that you want to download something from and the destination that you want to save it to on your file system. So if I write wget.get open parentheses, I'm sorry, I messed up, wget.download open parentheses image URL and then comma, and then here's the question. Where do we want to save? Where do we want to save this image to? So let's actually just look for a second at an image URL. I'm going to go back over here. I'm just going to say copy image address, and let's paste it in. So if we look at this, it's coming from some domain name, s.ali, probably for Alibaba, CDN, Content Delivery Network. There's a bunch of stuff afterwards. And then the actual image name is here, ub, blah, blah, all this stuff. And then it ends in .jpeg _ 300 by 300 .jpeg. So this is interesting. First of all, there's two .jpegs, which is kind of interesting. It kind of makes you think that 300 by 300 are the dimensions of the image, right? And I almost wonder, I actually haven't tried this before, so we'll see if it works. If I delete that and hit enter, yes, look at that. That actually gave us the full-size image. So let's just go back again. If I delete the _ 300 300 from here, we actually just get the full-size image. That was just a guess. It worked. Lucky us. Okay, so let's do that first of all in the code, right? Instead of having the image URL that we're downloading from be that 300 by 300 one, let's just replace it. Let's say image URL equals image URL dot replace, and then I'm going to replace underscore, I'll just copy it, underscore 300x300.jpg with nothing, just an empty string. Okay. Then what we want to do is, I think that what we should save this as on our file system is inside of the images folder, and then we should just use this line here, this very, very end of the URL. So how do we get that? So, well, there's a few ways, right? One way that we can get it is we can use a function in Python called split, which splits a string into an array given a delimiter character. So I'll show you how this works. If I take this and I'm just going to run this in the Python interactive interpreter just to show you. If I wrote URL equals, and then in quotes, and I paste this in, it's a very long URL. Okay, so that's the URL. If I write URL dot split, and then open parentheses, and then in quotes, /, what this will do is it will return a list to us where every element in the list is the next element after each individual slash. And we can see that it kind of broke up the URL for us. So it said HTTPS was the first one, then there was nothing, and then there was the domain and subdomain, and then each part of this path, right? So this part, then this part, and finally our last bit of the path, right, which is the actual image name. So in Python, if I want to get the last element of a list, remember this is a list. If I want to get the last element of it, I can say open square bracket -1. So -1 is the last element. And that could be our image name that we actually save to. So let's see what that looks like in the code. If I go back over here, I could say, let's make a new variable for it. I could call it destination equals image URL dot split / -1. So just get that last little bit. And then the other thing that we want to do is we want to save this. I made an images folder for us. We want to save this in the images folder. So I can write images / quote plus that. And then that makes the full destination be images and then whatever that end bit of the string is. So we can say wget.download image URL destination. And now we should be downloading the images. So if I go back over here, and I make this a little bit smaller, let's go ahead and run it. And I'm just going to go back over to the terminal so we can see that it's printing out each thing and it is downloading those images for us. So if I go to the Finder and I go to my desktop and I go to Alibaba and images, I should see all of these incredible images loading in. And one issue that we're having here is that there are some duplicates going on. And the reason there are duplicates perhaps is that there might be actually some duplicates in the listings. We're also seeing some funny things where some of these are PNG images rather than JPEG images. So we can handle that also. This is a very beautiful one. So if we want to handle that, we can just sort of copy and paste this here. So I can just copy this and paste it and just replace .jpeg with .png. That will account for that. And then finally, I can say, hey, actually don't download this thing if it already exists on our file system. Just skip it. So to do that, there's a Python library called OS that I'm going to import. And then a method in it called os.path.exists. And os.path.exists, you give it a string that's a path on your file system, and it just returns true or false depending on if that path exists or not. So we have this destination path. I can say if os.path.exists destination is not equal true. So if it doesn't exist, then go ahead and download it. And now if I run this one more time, we should see that it doesn't download any of the things because they already exist. And this is kind of like a probably, oh, it's still downloading some of them. So maybe that, oh no, okay, it's just downloading some of them, but not all of them, probably because some of these were those PNGs. So I think that's working now. The next and final thing that I'm going to show you in this tutorial, no, I'm going to show you a few more things. The next thing I'm going to show you in this tutorial is how to actually save out this data with the titles and the prices as something more useful than just like this stuff that we're printing onto the command line. And probably the most useful way to save, there's probably two ways that might be useful. One is as a CSV file, and one is as a JSON file. I'll show you JSON this time around. So this is going to be two steps. One is I'm going to import the JSON library, import JSON. And two is we're going to stick, instead of printing this stuff out, I'll just get rid of this for now, I'll just hide that, is we're going to take the product name, the price, the image URL, and we're going to create a little Python dictionary for each one of those items. We're going to stick all of those dictionaries into an array, and then we're going to save that array onto our file system as a JSON file. So I'm going to make a new array to hold everything in, and I'm just going to call it output, and I'll call it, and it'll just be an empty array, or rather, I'm sorry, a list in Python, open and square bracket. Output equals open square bracket. And then down here, I will say output item equals open squiggly bracket, and we'll say image colon image URL comma price colon price, and finally product name colon product name. So this makes us a little useful Python dictionary. And then I can say output.append output item. And finally, at the very bottom, when we're outside of our loop, I'm actually going to go ahead and save this to a file. And there is a one-liner. You can do this in Python to take any to take some Python objects and serialize them as JSON. So I can say JSON.dump, and then JSON.dump takes an array or an object that you want to save. Output is ours, and then a file object where you want to save things to. And to do that, I write open, and then some file path like products.json. And then I have to type W to say I want to open this file to be writable. And finally, I'm going to say indent equals 2 to indicate that I want our JSON to be formatted in a nice way. Okay, run this one more time again. And we should see in a moment that it's working. Okay, let's open this up in the Finder. And yes, now I have a file called product.json that has, for each element, the image, the price, and the product name. The very last part of this introduction to Selenium is that one really handy thing about Selenium, and later on about Puppeteer that I'll show you, is that you can run these browsers without them actually appearing on your computer. So you can run them without their graphic interface, and that's called running them in headless mode. So to run Selenium in headless mode, you need to import an options object, and I can never remember what it is, so I'm just copying and pasting it from someplace else. Up here, it's from selenium.webdriver.chrome.options, import capital O options. And then we need to make an options object. So to make the options object, you run options equals capital O options, and then you say options.add argument, and then in quotes dash dash headless. And dash dash headless, that means run the browser in headless mode, don't do anything visual. So driver equals, and then finally you have to tell webdriver.chrome to use your options. So you say options equals options. Okay, now I think this should do it. So if I run this one more time, I'll just leave this visible. If I run this one more time, we should see that nothing appears on the screen, but it's actually opening Chrome right now and doing something. The next step, if you are going to really use this script on a regular basis to scrape Alibaba, is that you'd probably want to do something that paginates, right? That goes through and clicks on every single page in the product listing. I'm not going to show you how to do that in this tutorial, but I have full code for doing that on scrapism.lav.io, and I would encourage you to try to, before you look at the example code, to give it a shot as an exercise and see if you can figure out how to implement that pagination on your own.